time in the world right now. I know a lot of you are out of school, and there's so much talk about your health and wellness and well-being throughout everywhere you look lately. So for today, I thought it'd be a really good idea to just teach the 4 vital signs to you: temperature, pulse, blood pressure, and respiration. What they are, what your normals are, and how you can find them on yourself. We'll start with temperature. With temperature, you always are going to need to use a thermometer to find your temperature. If you don't have a thermometer, of course, you can always sort of feel with the back of your hand, and if someone feels excessively warm or has chills and feels hot to the touch, it's probably a good indication that they have a fever. If not, the best thing to use is a thermometer. So this here is an ear cannula thermometer, so it will go into your ear like that. There's also under the tongue thermometers, and there's even sensors that you can place on right near the skin, and it'll give you a reading of what your temperature is. A normal temperature is between 36 and 38 degrees Celsius. Anything higher than that can be started to constitute as a low-grade fever. The way to get rid of a low-grade fever is to use an analgesic like a Tylenol or acetaminophen, and that should hopefully bring your fever down. Of course, it is of note in these times today that fever can sometimes be a symptom of the coronavirus. So if you have the fever along with general unwellness and malaise and have traveled outside the country in the last 14 days, you probably want to get tested and phone 811. Next up, we're going to talk about pulse. So pulse is how fast your blood pumps the blood from the heart through the body. A typical pulse is between 60 and 100 beats per minute. That can obviously be higher if you're exercising, or decreased if you just woke up, aren't very active, or if you're somebody that's in a very, very good physical condition, can often bring your heart rate down. A quick way to check your own pulse is to use these 2 fingers right here. Never use your thumb because that can have a bit of a pulse and it can create a false reading. So you're gonna choose a place with a main artery. The radial artery is probably the easiest and most accessible one to use on yourself. So from your thumb right to here is your radial artery. So then I'll just take my hands and like this and press firmly, and you'll start to feel your pulse. From there, I will count for a full minute. If I get 72, then I know my heart rate is 72 beats per minute, which is an appropriate range pulse. If you ever need to do a pulse on somebody else, you can obviously use their radial artery like we talked about. Another common one is the carotid artery, so sort of just right in the middle of the neck, off to the left-hand side. You can feel their pulse. Or I always like this one right here, up here behind the ear. So if you are sort of feeling unwell and you have an elevated pulse and you haven't done a lot of physical activity, that can be a sign that your body's working really hard and they could be fighting off an infection, or you could be getting sick. So often if we see an elevated pulse, that might be a sign that someone's starting to feel unwell. So it's a good way to check. Always with pulse, it's great to check for a full minute. I've also seen checking for 30 seconds, and then you can just double it as long as the pulse feels regular. Some people have irregular heartbeats like atrial fibrillation, and it will cause the beats, instead of going bum 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 bum, it'll be bum 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 bum. So this irregular heartbeat, it's called. You always want to test a regular heartbeat for a full minute to get a really better picture. If you yourself are just out exercising and it's just like really quick, it's not really a super important reading, you're just wondering like kind of where I am and how fast my heart's beating and how I'm feeling, sometimes what I'll do is I'll just check for 6 seconds. So if I'm checking it for 6 seconds, I get 7 pumps in 6 seconds. I can multiply that by 10, which will give you 60 seconds, and you know that your heart rate's around 70. So if you're exercising and you get 12 beats in 6 seconds, around 120. So that's just sort of a nice tip. If you're ever checking a pulse, for a medical reason or for a testing reason, you always want to do a full minute. But if it's just really quick on yourself, seeing where you're at, 6 seconds will give you a really rough idea. Just while we're talking about pulse, I just want to talk about respirations for a second. Respirations is the amount of breaths that somebody takes during a minute. Often it's something that you observe in the hospital, not really typical when you're just out in your home, you check respirations. Because usually just by looking at somebody, you can tell pretty quickly if their respirations are normal or if they're struggling to breathe. If you see someone sitting in the corner that's going like this, it's easy to see that their respirations are increased and they're having trouble getting some air in. I was always taught, which is a really good idea, because if you tell me you're going to read how much I'm breathing per minute, I'm going to get really focused on my breathing and start breathing more, breathing less, like not breathing how I accurately do. So what I was taught in school, which is a great idea, is after you do your pulse for a full minute, hang on to that arm for another 30 seconds or a minute, full minute, and watch their breathing. Natural respirations. Natural respirations are about 10 to 20 respirations per minute. So I take between 10 and 20 breaths per minute. Like I said before, respirations is when you can sort of see off the bat if they're low, shallow breathing or really rapid breathing, because you can usually sort of understand what a normal is. The final vital sign that we're going to go over is blood pressure. Now for blood pressure, you do need 2 items. You need a stethoscope and then you need a sphygmomanometer or a blood pressure cuff. So the stethoscope, we'll just go over quickly. Every stethoscope has the earpieces and then the bell. So when you hear this bell, it can be used for a variety of different reasons. Listening to your heart, S1, S2 sounds, lub dub, lub dub, lub dub. Listening to your breath, clear in and out, or listening to blood pressure. So when you're taking a blood pressure, there's a few things you like to have in mind. I always like to have whoever I'm taking the blood pressure with just sitting in a chair. Sometimes if you take a blood pressure of someone standing up, it can produce a lower number, or lying down as well. So sitting up in a normal chair position is the ideal situation, but obviously sometimes that's not always possible. When choosing which arm you would like to use, right or left, it really doesn't matter. Just be aware of certain medical conditions that you might not be able to use a certain arm for blood pressure. For example, if they had a mastectomy or lymph nodes removed, or if they have a medical device like a PICC line in their arm, you're just going to want to use the other one. When looking for blood pressure, you're going to wrap the cuff around, which I'll go over in a second, but you need to find the brachial artery. So if this is my arm, you're going to take the pinky side and travel all the way up to the bend of your arm until you feel that pulse. That pulse there, that's called your brachial artery pulse. That's where you want the stethoscope to land when you're taking the blood pressure. So you're going to put the sphygmomanometer, the blood pressure cuff, above that arm, and then you're going to place the stethoscope directly on this brachial pulse. If you look here, you'll see a standard size blood pressure cuff. Large adult size, that's the normal size. If you have a very little lady or an obese person, you might need a larger size cuff. This here, this gives you the range of the numbers that we'll go over. This is the pump. You always make sure it's turned all the way to the right, so it's resistant, and then you release it by turning it to the left. And then this is really important here. This artery line right here, you always want to make sure that you line up the brachial artery that we just talked about with this artery line. That's going to give you a proper reading. So I have my blood pressure cuff that's opened all the way. Right here where it says artery, so I'm going to open it up, and I often get the person to turn their arm out like this. It's also important to notice that you don't want to wear a big bulky sweater. It can be really hard to hear. So a sleeveless shirt or a really loose shirt is always the way to go. So you take this artery section, put it right on the brachial artery, and then as kind of tightly as you can, you're just gonna secure it like that with the Velcro. From there, I'm gonna hold my balloon ball in my dominant hand. This is what I'm going to use to pump it up. So you roll it all the way to the right to keep it tight, and all the way to the left to release it. Once I put on my stethoscope, put it right on my brachial artery that we talked about, and using this hand, we're going to start to pump up. So you're going to want to pump up to at least about 180 megamoles per mercury. There, you can just slowly start to release. as I release, I will hear one large boom. As it continues to go down, you hear boom, 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 boom. And then you'll stop hearing those noises. That first boom you hear, you always make note of where that is, and that last boom you hear, you always make note of that. That first boom, that's your systolic blood pressure, and that last boom is your diastolic blood pressure. For example, this time when I did it, it was 108/62. You can see I have my stethoscope on the brachial artery and my cuff pumped up. As I slowly release the cuff, I listen closely for the first sound and the last sound that I hear through my stethoscope. This is my systolic and diastolic blood pressure. Ideal normal blood pressure is around 120/80. A lot of different factors can come into play with that. Low blood pressure could be due to dehydration or medication that you take, or maybe you just naturally run low. High blood pressure could be a cause of hypertension or some sort of issues, underlying cardiac issues in your body. It's always important when you're checking any of these vital signs to look at the full picture of the person. If it's really out of whack, but they say they're fine, maybe it was a wrong reading. Or if it's a little bit out of whack, but they say, oh, I'm always low and that's my normal and that's what I'm used to, then typically that's okay. So it's just sort of always to use your judgment, but keep it around those parameters. I hope you learned a little bit about the 4 vital signs: pulse, temperature, respiration, and blood pressure. If you want to learn a little bit more from my class, you can check out our hashtag. It's hashtag StewBED2020, and there's lots of kind of informative things from baking cookies to feeding chickens. So hope you enjoyed and have a good day.